and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia, and I have some hot takes for you. I'm going to start with the hottest and go colder from there, because that's what you're here for. You're here for the hot takes. And my number one hot take is that the Chargers would be better off trading for a strong defensive piece, such as an edge rusher, than they would for an offensive lineman. I know how bad the offensive line has been. Please hear me out. The fact of the matter is teams don't want to trade their offensive linemen. They don't. Even teams that are ready to hit the reset button, and there are a few teams out there already, and there will be more as the season progresses closer to the trade deadline, but teams do not want to give up their offensive linemen. Pretty much every draft is a good edge rusher draft, and plenty of drafts are not good offensive line drafts. If anyone does trade, the most likely position that they will trade on the offensive line is guard, so I absolutely understand people looking at guard options. I'm looking at guard options, but the idea that they're going to trade for a starting center is completely off the table. I'm with you guys. Bradley Bozeman is a really bad player right now. He should not be the starter. I have a hard time understanding how Andre James can't compete with him. Honestly, that reflects really poorly on James. But the Chargers need talent there, and it's not going to be available at the deadline. There are going to be options at guard, but the fact of the matter is there are going to be so many more options at edge, and the Chargers need to look there, if nothing else, because looking to the future, would you rather use a high draft pick on a guard or on an edge rusher? Personally, I would rather use it on an edge. I think the edge could make a huge difference. Don't get me wrong, a guard could make the difference, but right now, Zion Johnson is probably the best offensive lineman, and that's a really bad sign, but again, he is the best. He's not playing that badly. Mekhi Becton could be great if he could stay on the field, and center is the problem. Trading for a guard does not fix center, whereas trading for an edge could do a lot to fix the defense. This is a defense that right now, they can't get at the quarterback, they can't create pressure, they can't set the edge, they can't tackle, and they aren't getting any turnovers. An edge rusher contributes to all of that. A star edge rusher makes a huge difference in all of those categories, and therefore makes a huge difference to the team. A good guard maybe provides some depth, and they need some depth. It is absolutely on their front office that they don't have depth, but an edge makes an immediate difference and frees up the first 2 rounds of next year's draft to be used where we need to put the most resources, which is, of course, the interior of the offensive line. Does this take prioritize the future over the present? Yes, but I think that's what good management does, at least until you're in the Super Bowl window. And I know it felt like we were in the Super Bowl window, but as soon as Rashawn Slater went down and then Khalil Mack and Joe Alt followed, we probably should have realized that that window is not quite open yet, and we are better off putting our resources toward next year. I'm not suggesting that the Chargers sell the house and try to just accumulate draft picks, but they should prioritize the future over now, and trading capital to overpay for an offensive lineman, which is what they would probably have to do to get anyone that isn't a third stringer on another team to act as a second string on the Chargers, is probably not worth it. My next hot take is both good and bad news for the Chargers, and it is that Jesse Minter will be the Chargers defensive coordinator next year again, meaning I think he will probably get interviews, but I don't think he will ultimately be hired. Now, there's a lot of season left, anything could happen, but the Chargers, while they looked really good in their first few games, their offense stood out more than their defense. That isn't to say that they haven't made great plays, but while Jesse Minter has consistently had them playing above their roster level is still really low. I just don't think that Jesse Minter is going to be able to put together an elite enough defense for him to be one of the more desirable head coaches. Now, it's not like a couple years ago where there were a tremendous amount of very desirable head coaches, but by the end of the year, there could be, besides all of the college coaches, any of whom might actually want to be in the NFL. I mean, if Ryan Day wants to be in the NFL, I don't know who's going to stop him. Jesse Minter is also competing with Mike McCarthy, Joe Brady, Brian Flores, Chris Shula, Jeff Hafley. I mean, there could be so many more coaches by the end, and right now, Jesse Minter, while he was a name talked about in the first 2 weeks, hasn't really been talked about since. So we will see how that goes. There will also be teams that you think should fire their coach that won't. That's just how it goes every year. And there may be a team or two who shouldn't fire their coach who do. But the likelihood of there being more than 5 head coaching jobs next year isn't super high. And even if Jesse Minter does get offers, you have to ask, would he accept it at a suboptimal position? Probably not. You know, I wouldn't want to go and coach the Dolphins next year. They're just not in a good situation right away, and Jesse Minter strikes me as a guy who will be patient, will make the right choice for him long term, and who will get multiple opportunities if that's what he wants, and chances are it is. But like I said, this is kind of good news for the Chargers. Jesse Minter with 3 years in the same defense, that could be a really powerful thing. He'll still have a bunch of players in their prime. Khalil Mack will probably come back, is what it looks like now. Derwin James is in his prime, Deion Henley, and maybe, just maybe, if we listen to my first hot take, Jesse Minter will have some blue chip players for him on the defensive side, and that could make a huge difference for him moving forward. Getting a little bit colder now, my third hot take is that Justin Herbert doesn't get enough personal foul calls, and this is largely because he is a good person who does not whine and complain to officials. That's part of the reason we like him so much. It's a very likable quality, but if he complained more to the officials, if he was someone who will throw his hands up and make the officials look bad in the stadium and on the broadcast, he would probably get more calls. And you might be thinking, but surely refs are more professional than that, and while I do think refs are generally really accurate with most calls, those calls that are always gray area that you're like, yeah, it's kind of personal foul, kind of not, it could go either way, those are the ones where you really see the humanity of the refs. And you know, Justin is a really big guy, he's like 6'6", and he's, you know, I've said it before, he's built like a tight end, and that kind of counts against him. You know, a lot of the time, Josh Allen, who has a similar build, won't get calls, but Josh Allen will whine and complain a little bit, and then he'll get more. You know, he doesn't complain as much as someone like Mahomes, but the fact of the matter is, Justin Herbert could do more for his team if he was willing to do that. I understand that then if you don't get the call, it's kind of a bad look. I totally understand. Like, as a former athlete, I pretty much never would argue with refs. It felt morally wrong in a way. So I totally understand why he doesn't do it, but I think it could do his team some good, and it might even fire up his team a little bit behind him. That's something that a lot of people have been talking about. They want Justin to show more emotion. It's just not his leadership style, you know? I don't blame him, and I see people saying, why doesn't he just go in on these offensive linemen? And to me, it's like, well, first of all, he probably introduced himself to some of them last week, but also, what good does it do to do that in front of people? You know, we have no idea how he talks to them in private. We truly do not know. And that's one of those things that shouldn't be on his plate. Would they benefit a bit if he did that? Yeah, probably. I think a little bit might help, and you know, anything is worth trying. But the team respects Justin so much that to question his leadership to me is kind of pointless, because the team loves him. You know, the team wants to fight for him. They want to play for him. They care so deeply every time that he's hit when he's not supposed to be. You know, it might do something for them, you know, if he turns on them a little bit, gets them fired up a little bit, but at the same time, you know, he's the one in the locker room. He's the one who sees all that, who knows what's going on. I think it's okay for us to trust him, and if he does turn and start yelling at them at this point, it might just be beating them while they're down. I think his personality is a good compliment to Jim Harbaugh's, and we should probably just accept that. My final hot take is one I think a lot of you are actually going to agree with me about. You are better off watching the broadcast of the game, but listening to the radio broadcast of the game. The voice of the Chargers, Matt Money Smith, he does a great job, and he knows more about these players than these national broadcasters do. You know, I'm so sick. I don't think it happened this last weekend, but I'm so sick of these broadcasters messing up Tuli Tuipulotu's name. Not only is it not a super hard name, but he's a really important player on this team. Clearly, if you work with this team, if you watch this team, you've talked about him before, but these national broadcasters, they don't. They just go team to team. So to me, I'm like, shouldn't the play-by-play be a national guy so that it can be one of the best play-by-plays, but then the color guy, shouldn't that be designated per team or maybe per division or something so that he's actually familiar with these players? You know, so many times I've heard inaccurate information about guys signed to the practice squad, about guys, you know, how they played last year, or even basic things like what college did they go to? And I'm like, I can't be sitting here knowing more about this team than the guys on the broadcast who are paid, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to mess these things up. It's so infuriating to me. And I also, if television broadcasters are biased, a lot of the time, you know, they're trying not to be, so it ends up just kind of coming out as a little bitter. They end up just being negative about the other team. I don't mind listening to a home team broadcast when I'm a fan of the other team. when it's a radio broadcast, because there's nothing wrong with being really enthusiastic about your team and giving me a lot of good information about your team. It's just random and uncalled for negativity about my team that I don't like, and I find that national broadcasters cannot keep their biases to themselves. You know, in my last video I talked a bit about how, of course, Tom Brady, you know, as much as he is complimentary of Justin Herbert, you know, he clearly has a negative slant toward the Chargers, and that makes sense. That's fair. He's a Raiders owner, but it's not fair from a viewing perspective. And you tend to get more football knowledge. You'll pick up more knowledge from listening to the radio broadcast because they have to be more descriptive, and therefore they have to more quickly know what players are what numbers, what formation are we in. Do they usually use Scott Matlock in this way? Do they usually use Tucker Fisk in this way? They tend to be able to speak to the significance of these decisions a little bit better, and I just find that that's a better viewing experience. So I highly recommend that. Matt Money Smith does a great job with Daniel Jeremiah, and obviously if you understand Spanish, go ahead and listen to the Spanish broadcast, because, and this is true across all sports, the Spanish broadcast is always better. That's my hot take. And my last little bonus hot take, and this isn't just the Chargers, this is every team, I don't like when the whole uniform is one color. If it's gonna be all one color, white can work if your uniform has some other colors in it, some texture to it, but for the most part, you know, I don't want it to look like they picked you up by the scruff and then they dipped you all in one paint. I just don't think that looks good. I think one of the best things about uniforms is contrast. That's why when you see players wear compression sleeves or something, a lot of time they end up looking the best because they do a complementary color instead of just continuing the same color. I don't know why teams are so obsessed with the all one color. It probably comes from the influence of college, but I'm personally not a fan. Curious what you guys think though. Let me know what you think of all of these hot takes, particularly I think on Jesse Minter and where he stands. I think there's a lot to be revealed still about this defense. And of course, what do you think trading at the deadline looks like? Because it could look like a lot of things. You know, surprising things can happen. There have been, you know, maybe 10 starting interior offensive linemen traded in the last 10 years. The likelihood of a really splash trade isn't high, but if the Chargers do get one off, I have to imagine that it will be an edge rusher, because those are just a lot more abundant even on bad teams than offensive linemen are, and that sucks, but the reality is Justin Herbert is on track to get more sacks than in any other season, and that is saying something. He and Joe Burrow, man, they are on the Andrew Luck track, and you hate to see it, but I think that the Chargers made that mistake this offseason, and now they have to live with it. It's unfortunate. Let me know what you guys think. My name is Cecilia. This has been the Chargers Check-In. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and subscribe for more. See you guys next time.